Hello everyone and welcome to this little taster session supporting learners who are deaf. I'm very pleased to tell you that I've got Sarah Townsend with me who's going to outline some information about a half-day training session that we're putting together on this very subject. We've got a date lined up for December, 8th of December 2017, and it's in the afternoon, being held in Euston, London, 1 o'clock till 3:30. We're actually sharing the day with another half-day session on working with students who've got mental health illness, and we will be running that in the morning, and then in the afternoon it will be the deaf session. So this is just to give you a brief information and outlook about what's being covered in that session. So let me just give you a quick introduction to Sarah Townsend. Sarah is the director of a company called Disability Learning, and she provides training and support for lots of people, old and young, who have learning disabilities. So Sarah, I'd just like to hand over to you and you can perhaps give us a bit more about your background.
Okay, thank you, Hilary. Yeah, I worked for many years in education, mainly in adult and FE, with people with learning disabilities and other types of disabilities. So it would be mental ill health, and I've also been a communication support worker for deaf people. My interest in the area of working with deaf people came from a very early age from my sister, who's a year younger than me, who she would class herself as having a hearing impairment. So she'd be deaf with a small d. She went to mainstream school, wears a hearing aid and lip reads. But I've also been a foster carer for a deaf child as well who used sign language. So and I've worked with teams of deaf tutors who have taught sign language as well. So I'm a BSL user, albeit very rusty now, but obviously have a keen interest in this area. So the part of this course is going to look at the difference between a deaf with a capital D and deaf with a small d, and why that is important for us to look at. So when we look at deaf with a capital D, we're looking at people that are probably BSL users that are pre-lingually deaf. So were either born deaf or were deaf from a very early age, so they didn't acquire spoken language. And that often means that they will use sign language as their first language, and they probably are attached to a quite strong deaf culture. There's a big, huge deaf community out there that are very supportive of each other, and they do lots of different things together. And there's quite a shared culture, like any minority group, really. And it's important for us to recognise that if we're supporting people that are BSL users.
Yeah.
Whereas when we look at a deaf with a small d, we're talking more about people that have had hearing loss, that are likely to have some spoken language and more associated with the hearing world. And depending on the person's needs, depends on how we support them. So this course is going to touch a little bit on that, but more look at how we support people in the classroom. So we'll be looking at different barriers to learning, and obviously there are some here, but go into them in more detail on why that might be a barrier to learning. So for example, just one example of finding it hard to concentrate. If you think someone is a lip reader, so they might not have a BSL interpreter there because they don't need that, but they lip read. You try turning the sound down on the news, and people that are news presenters actually speak quite well, so they've got quite good lip patterns, but normally have very clear facial, so not lots of facial hair. It is really hard to actually pick up what they're saying. So you have to concentrate really hard, and that would make it really hard for someone to keep concentrating for long periods of time. And so it's really important that we give people rest breaks and things like that.
Okay. There's quite a few on here. You go through these in more detail on the training, I guess, and ways to deal with it.
So obviously, as I said earlier, it's about understanding the barriers and their needs, and being deaf aware. Now you think it's obvious. Some things are really obvious, and we need to know them. But sometimes you automatically don't do them. So when I've done observations, for instance, I've seen people speaking to their class and then turn around and writing something on the board and carry on speaking. For someone who's a lip reader, that would be impossible for them to understand what was being said there. So it's things like that to look at how we can support them and make sure we give them the right information.
There's a few more here on tips.
Yeah, obviously I've said give learners rest breaks, but like video clips, we all use them in our teaching. I know when I do training, I use lots of them. YouTube's a great place for that. The problem with the clips on YouTube, they're not always subtitled. So it might be that you let the student, look at the clip beforehand so that they can use it with their software. Or if it's an interpreter in the class, you might let them look at it beforehand because it's much harder for them to interpret. They can pick out the key things.
Okay.
You could even put some of the key messages from the video in there for people. So
interesting.
It's really important to think about all of those types of things. Again, what part of the training, we'll look at communication tactics and make sure that we come away with some practical ways of communicating with people, whether they use BSL as their first language or whether they are just using hearing aid and lip reading.
It's interesting, this about always face a deaf person, and I've had students in the past where they've had a communication support worker with them who's signing for them. And it's quite hard to get used to that three-way conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to look at the student while you're speaking. The student is looking at the communication support worker, who the communication support worker is looking at you and at the student in alternating ways. It's quite tricky.
I think it's really important to remember that the communication support worker or interpreter is trained, so they know they can switch between both, and just really the importance is to focus on the person you're communicating with, because otherwise you don't develop that close relationship. And sometimes people that are deaf might feel a bit isolated and that they're only with their communication support worker and they're the ones always communicating them, when really you want to develop that relationship as a teacher with that student yourself.
Well, I definitely can acknowledge that that's a skill that you can acquire. But for a teacher to look at the student,
I think you have to
even though
practice.
They're not looking at you.
It
is you do have to practice, and you do have to overcome that sort of awkwardness around it, don't you? Interesting points. Okay, here's a couple more.
I was once on a train, actually, a packed train coming from London, and there was this chap walking through the train with a little bit of paper, and nobody would give him any eye contact. And basically he was a BSL user, and he was trying to find out whether he was on the right end of the train. The train split in half, and he didn't know because the information was being given over the tannoy, and he obviously couldn't hear it. But people felt uncomfortable with it, and they didn't know what to do, so they just didn't give him any eye contact, looked at the floor. Luckily, he handed a bit of paper to me, and I could sign, so that was fine. But when we're so like, he had it written down, so someone could have picked up that bit of paper and written down for them. So writing down information, even if you can't sign it, is really quite important. Just simple things like that. It would have solved his, he really struggled. So there's lots of different ways of communicating, and we'll do lots of different things about communication, and we'll have a couple of practical, fun tasks where we look at how we communicate without using body language and with using body language. Because even if you can't sign, the fact that you can use body language, a lot of signs and gestures are similar, so you can get the information across.
So you will cover in the training some gestures that you can use.
We will cover a little bit. We won't go into lots of signing, but we'll cover like finger spelling and some key signs that you might be able to use that actually help you to communicate with somebody and make people feel comfortable, but also look at, if you don't have those skills, how else you might communicate with somebody.
Okay. Well, we've got this training again, just to remind you, 8th of December, and it's 1 o'clock in London Euston. It's a half a day, and it's all about supporting learners who are deaf with Sarah. And remember that we're sharing that with the mental health training in the morning. So you could come to both of those sessions or just the one. If you want to just come to the supporting learners who are deaf, and it's £75 for that session. And if you wanted to come for the whole day, which includes the mental health training, it's £140. So you get a resource pack, and obviously you get a wealth of knowledge and experience from Sarah by attending. This is what's going to be covered in the half-day training. We're going to look again at the difference between deaf and deaf capital D, and the barriers to learning, and some strategies to reduce them. So we're going to really contextualise that for the learning environment. And in fact, they can be replicated in any setting, so it doesn't have to be in a learning environment. And there will be some communication tactics, and as Sarah said, there'll be a few bits of signing that you can pick up to come away with, which will be good fun, I'm sure. So what you need to do is to get in touch to book your place. You can email me, I'm Hilary, at info@can-do-courses.co.uk, or telephone me on 01737 321 179. If you get in touch with us, we can give you more information about location and the a formal information pack. So thanks again, Sarah, for coming along to tell us more.
I look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, that would be good. Bye for now.